We are still in the post-verdict period of the Karen Read trial. Yesterday, we went through quite a few statements, but we didn't get to all of them because attorney Alan Jackson responded in the middle of stream. So we switched gears and took a look at what he had to say, firing back at attorney Brennan, because there was still apparently so much to say about this case. But it's Wednesday, it's June 25th, 2025. We are about a week after the verdict, or we're coming up on a week after the verdict a little bit later today, like to the hour. We're going to talk about the jurors today. I do want to see what the jurors have to say, because not all the time do we get to see the jurors speak out in a case. They don't always want to. And I love getting to see A, what they have to say, but B, the transparency of this is what we were thinking. This is how we were thinking. This was published June 20th at 7:42 p.m. originally. So this was right in time with the verdicts coming in. Juror number 1, the foreman in the Karen Read retrial, told the Herald there was no quote unquote aha moment in the grueling case that he said wasted the taxpayers' money on paper-thin evidence that failed to bring any comfort to the victim's family. It's a pretty strong statement. They go on to say the juror said he's still struggling with the whirlwind case and the times he'd gaze over at victim John O'Keefe's mother, who would wipe away tears when images were shown of the Boston police officer with his head split open. Still, he added, the jury couldn't lock up Read, the officer's girlfriend, on the measly evidence presented. And I appreciate that when the juror spoke, he spoke about the impact of, I see the victim's family there, but we need to have evidence. And that's a really hard thing to reconcile, is both things are true. Like, both things are true. I feel for the victim's family, I do. But also, that is not a reason to convict someone. You cannot convict on sympathy. The jury's announcement of a verdict on Wednesday that was suddenly pulled back was over one male juror who had doubts. At lunch, I asked the juror, "Are you okay? Do you think I can take back my vote?" he asked. Other jurors got a little nervous, the foreman added, but 20 minutes later, he said, "Okay, guilty of OUI." It's helpful to see an explanation of what happened with the false start. I thought it might have to do with the verdict forms, because that's logical to me, but it also makes sense that somebody was nervous. Since her first interview with independent journalist Jessica Machado on Thursday, Juror 11, Prado, has been the subject of accusations from internet trolls. She addressed them during her interview on the Howie Carr show. They were all saying, how come she is an attorney and she was picked for the jury? She's a liar. No, I'm not an attorney in the US, and I'm an attorney in Brazil. Never worked here, not licensed here. She also said, and quote, how come she loves true crime, but she didn't know about the case? She said, because all my interest was Brazilian cases from my country, my social media account is in Portuguese. The attorneys did voir dire. The attorneys asked questions, and all the attorneys accepted this juror as a juror. It's not for the internet to question, because if there was evidence that a juror had said something not true on a jury form, it would come up in motions. We saw it immediately in the Maxwell case. The jurors are accepted by both sides and are questioned by both sides. She said, I really didn't know about this case. She added, I thought Turtle Boy, and they put in paren journalist in Kearney, was an environmental problem, and Karen Read was just a lady. I mean, she's like turtles. And the article continues to say, the stay-at-home mother to 4 young children called the power given to her to decide Read's fate a great, huge responsibility that she was happy to be a part of and able to serve justice. Quote, I am really happy that I am confident that Karen Read isn't going to jail. She's not going to pay for something she didn't do. This filled me with joy, she said, and filled me with anger that the fact that we don't know what happened with John O'Keefe. When jurors choose to talk, I'm always curious as to what they have to say. It's very interesting. And this was Friday, so this was pretty close in time to the verdict. I am encouraged by hearing jurors saying, I have tremendous sympathy and empathy over here, but there are holes for me in the evidence, and so I can't convict over here. That's what we want them to do. It's exactly what we want them to do. And these jurors did what they are asked to do in the way they are asked to do it. And I think that's important. My frustration is, and we've seen it in this article from the Boston Herald, that this juror is already, and this was on Friday, saying that she's already being threatened. That's only going to cause future jurors to not want to be jurors. You're going to get people who are like, I don't need my fucking life turned upside down by this shit. And you're going to get people in jury service saying, nah, I've got airfare. No, I've heard all about this case, even if they haven't. You're going to get people more actively trying to get out of jury service because they don't want to end up in a mess. One of the things that's helpful is to remember, jurors don't have to speak if they don't want to. They don't have to come forward if they don't want to. There is always a fight over sealing juror lists, but if jurors are going to get threatened, I think there's a reason courts might want to seal juror lists and then let jurors choose to come forward. If not, maybe that needs to be the default. Maybe it needs to be the default that juror lists are sealed unless the jurors choose to come forward, because not all jurisdictions seal them by default. And maybe that's a change that needs to happen. We will see jurors not want to come forward and bring transparency to the system, and that is really frustrating. I think there should be transparency, and we want good people to do their civic duty, people from just their everyday life. So I hope this doesn't affect most cases, because most cases aren't going to have a high profile like this, but it's going to make it harder for high profile defendants to find juries. And so when you see the Corey Richins judge talking about his concern about the media, when you see the defense bringing it up in Utah, there are concerns there. And I get it.
Sir, I asked one of your other fellow jurors this question. There's a very fine distinction. In your opinion, is Karen Read innocent? She didn't do this? Or is it just that the prosecutors did not put on enough evidence to convict?
Karen Read is innocent, and she didn't do this crime. No one could prove that she did this crime, so I looked at her from day one as an innocent woman that needed to be proven guilty, and I don't think any of that was shown in this process.
If she didn't do it, who did?
That's not my job. So, I mean,
facts.
Something did happen to Mr. O'Keefe, and it's foul play or whatever you want to say, but there was no evidence to even, through multiple witnesses and testimony by his autopsy and everything, there was still no one said to solid evidence that there was a collision or he got hit by a car.
So you don't.
It's the job of the police to find out what happened. It's our job to tell you if what they said happened, happened. I really appreciate also that he's not going to speculate.
Were you aware of just how high profile this case was? There were throngs of people outside in front of the courthouse. I know the jury officers, kept you away from that, but there was a big scream at the end when the verdict was read that was audible in the courtroom. How much did you know about that, and how much, if anything, did that have to do with your process, your deliberations?
I was just going to go with whatever evidence showed us. If it was finding her guilty or finding her not guilty, and we were just going to go with the evidence. And at the end of the day, when I came in on Monday, I established to everyone, I just want everyone to feel like they're heard 100%, their thoughts, their process is being heard also in that process. And everyone felt at the end of the deliberations that everyone felt good about the decision that we all collectively came together with. So
in the end, there is still a mother who lost her son, Officer O'Keefe. What do you think justice would look like for the O'Keefe family?
Well, that's a question. I'm interested to see what he answered, but man, not his job.
One looking into it further, but looking into it further with the evidence that you already have, and then you finally find a possible person, there's going to be the same complications of all this other stipulations of the evidence and everything else to go along with it. So it's just hard. And to put a mother through that, and a father and a brother and a whole family through that again it's a lot. Even me being there for 8 weeks and 9, and just sitting and watching the videos and seeing the tape and everything, it's a lot to see your loved one go through that. So
Yes.
It's a lot for the jurors as well. It's a community service that people as citizens are asked to do. And as a foreman in particular, no one gives you a manual and tells you how to deliberate. So thank you for your service. Thank you for being here, Mr. Foreman. We appreciate it.
And that is the end of the Today Show interview with juror number 1 from the Read case. What I appreciate is that one of the things he really highlighted was, at the end of the day, I wanted everyone in the jury room to feel heard. I wanted everyone's process to be respected. I wanted to make sure that all the jurors, and this is me paraphrasing, but felt good about their verdict and feel like they had a chance to deliberate and to process. And then when they ask him about what does justice for John O'Keefe look like, it's a really hard question for the jurors to answer. It's not on the jury if they weren't presented with a better case. It's not on the jury if the case wasn't investigated better. It's on the jury to decide what they're presented if it matches. And this jury said, no, it absolutely doesn't. Jurors are told not to be swayed by sympathy. And so part of my discomfort with the questions of what about the victim and the victim's family is that the jurors aren't really to consider that when they're deliberating. There were definitely times in this case, let me know what you think, where the prosecution leaned into that sympathy and leaned into what the O'Keefe family had been through, but they can't make their decision on that. And so it's interesting to see that the media is still asking those questions, because the only people who can really decide how to move on for the O'Keefes is the O'Keefes, because this has not been an easy process for them. But the responsibility of that also lays with the prosecution's office. The prosecutors could have chose at the beginning not to prosecute. The prosecutors could have chose at the beginning not to prosecute for the charges that they did. They could have chose not to do a retrial. And yeah, the family would have been angry with that. I'm sure they would have. But sometimes that's your job as a prosecutor. I think it's better that they're angry at you for not moving forward on a case that you can't prove than to drag them through multiple trials.
Ben, good evening. Unlike the first 2 jurors that we've heard from who rendered their verdict of not guilty for Karen Read, this one, juror number 12, says during those 20 hours of deliberations, she changed her mind.
I was hoping that my fellow jurors could help me to go through all of this. So I went in with a very open mind, but definitely leaning toward that she was guilty.
Jimenez says what changed her mind is when she went looking for something in the more than
I appreciate the candor.
200 pieces of evidence.
Like
she
that,
won't say what that something was, but says she didn't find it.
And it was one big part that led me closer to there's a lot of doubt here.
I thought it was interesting. It was a different perspective. And it was a juror who's like, you know what? I changed my mind and I was open to listening to the other jurors. It is unrealistic to believe that every single juror who comes in, even though they are told about the presumption of innocence, even though they are told what the evidence is and how they find the evidence and what guilty beyond a reasonable doubt means, there will still be jurors that come in and are like, okay, yeah, but for real though. And I appreciate the candor of this juror saying, I was one of those jurors who came in and was like looking at you over in the defendant's seat. What are you doing? And then kept an open mind and changed their mind. I think it is much more realistic to hear jurors say that. The next interview we're doing is from a juror that asked to remain anonymous with NBC 10 Boston. They gave this interview in like shadow and I think with a little bit of voice alteration to remain anonymous, but still did speak out to NBC 10 Boston, who has covered this case.
She says at first she didn't even want to be seated on the jury.
I love my job. I didn't want to not be there for a long time. Also, it's a huge case that everyone has really made their mind up on.
But this juror didn't, she says, until deliberations started more than a week ago after closing arguments.
That's fair.
Everybody in that room was very smart and very committed to telling their story and their version of the story, which more than anything led me to walk into that jury room with no opinion.
After about 2 months of being on the jury together without being able to share an opinion.
I think we started making a lot more progress when I got like huge poster board paper and then worked with other members of the jury to write down the definition of every charge.
Oh my God, I love that. They like workshopped the jury instructions.
Was it hard to focus or, with the pressure of the big crowds outside every day chanting?
They shouldn't have known about
how
that.
How much pressure was that for you guys?
I didn't see people outside until, I think Monday, because the way the bus brings us to the back of the courthouse, only if you look to your right and you see maybe some pink shirts or something, but I didn't know it was that big crowd like yesterday.
I'm really glad to hear it, that the jury didn't know.
And we couldn't hear anything. They covered the room so we couldn't see through the window. And through the whole process, I didn't hear anything inside the courtroom. None of us did.
The jurors took their job seriously. They were conscientious in going through the evidence. They were respectful of each other. They were patient with each other. We saw the foreperson saying in one of their Boston Herald telephone interviews that when they had a verdict and then withdrew the verdict and then had a verdict, that one of the other jurors got cold feet and they needed to give them a little bit of time. And then all the jurors felt good about reaching the OUI verdict. And in the interview we just saw with Juror 11, saying that, yeah, she said she was drinking. We saw the video of her drinking. We were comfortable with that OUI verdict. And I hope that us going through the juror interviews not only gives you a look into their process, but a look into how seriously the jurors take what they did. This has been a chatty jury, not in a bad way, a chatty jury in that they've been accessible and pretty open, I think, with all the things that they have shared. And I appreciate it. I think it helps with the transparency, and I hope that it restores a little bit of humanity into this process of, look, these are jurors that came out of their life to hear all of this evidence and make a decision. And each one of them said there was just not enough proof. And they've gone further than that. They didn't just say there wasn't enough evidence. They said Karen Read did not do this. And we want there to be justice for John O'Keefe. We want them to continue looking at what happened. We want answers to what happened. And I think that really echoes not only my sentiments about the case, but yours. What happened? This investigation truly seemed to stop in its tracks very early on with Proctor, and we saw Proctor's interview on stream yesterday. We had a shoe, we had taillight, and we had her statements done. And they went no further in the investigation. The jurors that we have seen talking said, but you should go further. You should ask more questions because the victim and his family deserve answers, and they didn't get it. And they have every right to be angry at that. I don't think their anger is directed at law enforcement. Maybe it should be, but also I'm not going to tell people how to grieve. I do not see a good investigation in this case. I don't know if there's opportunity for that to be rectified. But putting someone who can't be proven to have done it in prison for a second-degree murder or a manslaughter isn't justice. And it's also not answers, because if Karen Read had been convicted, it would be a 10-year appellate process that probably would have asked the same kinds of questions, because there were issues in this case where we were sitting there going, what in the world is happening? So it still wouldn't have been done. And that's not an answer. I hope it's not going to be local law enforcement, but I hope we will see some resolution or answers in this case. I don't know if we will. This is resolution of this prosecution, but I don't feel like I have all the answers. I don't know if you do. Even if those answers are uncomfortable, the victim's family deserves wherever the evidence leads. That's the thing with an investigation. It can't be pointed in one direction. It has to be curious and open. And this investigation was not that. It was not curious. It was not open. And it did not run down all of the different avenues that it could have. And it was frustrating to hear yesterday Trooper Proctor saying, I mean, I wouldn't have done anything different. Even with all of this, gestures broadly at the internet. Maybe we could have looked at some other cars just to say we did it. There are still questions here, but seeing how the jury evaluated this case and conducted themselves and respected one another and respected the process, I think is incredibly helpful as a reminder that people are really trying to get it right. Jurors are trying to get it right. And I really appreciate all of them choosing to come forward and talk about this case. I can't imagine how frustrated they are as they go back and see some of the other stuff, because there's a lot this jury didn't see. And I wonder in the weeks to come if we will see them talking more about that. I'm sure some of them already have. And we might, and maybe we'll hear from other jurors down the road. Thanks for joining me. If you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss updates on your favorite cases, you're going to need the LawNerd app at lawnerd.app.com. That way you can stay in the loop on the cases that matter most to you, and you never know when you're going to catch feelings for a new case. So make sure you get it for free on iOS and Android. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being a Law Nerd.